Okay. I'm sharing the file. You see the file, I think, isn't it?
Hocam, not yet. Here is just small open economy. We start from here?
No, aggregate demand and aggregate supply in the short and long run. You don't see this?
Not yet, hocam.
Okay, then I have to stop the sharing. Now you will see. Okay, now comes. How about?
Yes, hocam, by the way, last two our lesson was not uploaded the here.
I will.
Because I checked through your lesson through the YouTube as well, because I compare.
I have too many things. I have too many things to do. Then I forget sometimes. I will try to upload. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Sorry, my dear. I have really too many things to do. It is a long lasting. Okay, education. Don't worry. I will do it.
Compare from my lessons and from your YouTube channel, everything.
Okay. Thank you, Taptik.
Thank you.
Okay, today I will refresh you and comprehensively give you the aggregate demand and aggregate supply in the short run and the long run. This will be very comprehensive, a little bit more detailed for you. And then next lecture, then I will give you one application with the Keynesian expenditure output model, which is introduced to you today. Okay. As you know, the aggregate supply we have already defined, but let's go through again. Is defined as the total amount of goods and services, which is the real output produced and supplied by an economy's firms over a period of time. It includes the supply of number of types of goods and services, including private consumer goods, capital goods, public and merit goods, and goods for overseas markets. The components of the aggregate supply, as you see, the consumer goods, the capital goods is given now. The consumer goods, as you know, the goods which is consumed by the ordinary households, the goods and services such as motor vehicles, computers, clothes, entertainment are supplied by the private sector and consumed by households. For a developed economy, this is the single largest components of aggregate supply. And the capital goods, so-called, which is used in the production operation process, capital goods such as machineries, equipment, plant, are supplied to the firms, to the companies. These investment goods are significant in that their use adds to capacity and increases the economy's ability to supply private consumer goods in the future. The other components of the aggregate supply is the public and merit goods, the goods and services produced by private firms for use by central and local governments, such as education and healthcare, are also a significant components of aggregate supply. And many private firms, such as those in construction, the IT, and the pharmacy rely on contract to supply to the public sector. And also the traded goods, the goods and services for exportable markets, such as chemicals, entertainment, and financial services, are also a key components of aggregate supply, is supposed to be in the economy for the aggregate supply considered. The aggregate supply, as I mentioned to you, is a vertical line. As you see here, the classical view suppose real output was that it is fixed at a particular level, therefore it is not affected from the price changes. At this level, all the factors, of course, it is changed from the price level, but it is fixed, sorry. All this, at this level, all the factors of production in the economy will be fully employed, supposed to be. Therefore, it is not changing because, as you know, in the classical economy, it is supposed that the amount of the produced goods and services is time lag, especially in agriculture, lag behind the time, and as much as it is increased or required to increase, needs some period of time or some infrastructure, some construction for realizing the new buildings, new equipments for enlarging and increase. Therefore, it is a process, and it is not dependent to the short period of time where it is going to be used. The change in the aggregate demand will only bring about changes in the price level as it is given, but not the supply, because supply needs some time, and therefore aggregate demand can be shifted to the upper level results of these price changes, but the supply is not changing. It is stay intact. From the Keynesian view, when we are considering the Keynesian aggregate supply curve assumes that price and wages are fixed until the full employment is reached, and over the Keynesian range, there is a spare capacity in the economy. The price level is stable and real output can expand as a result of increasing the aggregate demand without inflationary pressure. As it is given here, the aggregate supply, the Keynesian indicates now, as you see, the short run is somehow the price is ineffective, the price not changing, but then in the intermediate, it is supposed to be going from E1 to E2. It is changing. The aggregate demand is changing and affecting the aggregate supply. And as you see, in the long run, aggregate supply becomes then again stable as it is in the classical. Up to the real output level, whereas the full employment is considered, and the full employment has also meant the output is then reached to the equilibrium. Increases in the aggregate demand have no effects on the price level where it is shown here, because this is not affecting and changing anymore the aggregate supply. And increases in the aggregate demand beyond the full employment cause an increase in the price level, but not increase the real output. As you see, after changing until the short run is approaching to the intermediate level, the price stay intact and the aggregate supply is somehow becoming enlarged and increased. But then in the long run, it is becoming intact and it is not changing. As you see, the aggregate supply becomes a vertical position. Therefore, in the short run, as much as where the price is stable, it is supposed that this aggregate demand shifts in the intermediate period of time, especially shifts the aggregate supply curve either. But then, when and where it is the full employment and full output, the capacity used and the equilibrium realized, then the aggregate supply becomes a vertical position, is not changing regarding to the price changes. As it is indicated to the classical view, the price changes not affecting and changing the aggregate supply, but aggregate demand is changed, as you see. Beyond full employment, as it is YF is indicated here on the graph, any change in aggregate demand will bring out about higher prices level. As you see, it is shifting the prices to the where these red lines on the aggregate demand 1 to 2 shifted. The Keynesian view of aggregate supply was adapted to show an intermediate range where this, as I said to you, between this aggregate demand 1 and aggregate demand 2, this is the intermediate range or intermediate period of time or a short, medium period. The Keynesian view as aggregate demand was adapted to show the intermediate range where both unemployment and inflation could occur together. In the short run, as it is seen, price changes are observed in intermediate range where these red lines indicated with the aggregate demand. It becomes effective on aggregate supply and shift outward. As you see, the aggregate supply is now going to accelerate it and shift it and becomes to the long run position where it is becoming vertical. This causes higher prices, inflation, and shift the output to the right side as it is represented on the graphic. The modern short run, long run, short and long run view is then, of course, a little bit affected. To solve the problem of Keynesian and classical aggregate supply curve, modern economists tend to separate the short run aggregate supply curve and the long run aggregate supply curve. The short run is assumed to begin immediately after the increase in the price level, where, as I said to you on the graph here, you see this is the short intermediate range in the modern economy. It is supposed in the modern economies that the economy accelerating and creating here some resources and creating some surpluses, creating some production and affecting and changing the economical activities for the aggregate supply and for the aggregate demand. And the short run is assumed to begin intermediate immediately after the increase in the price level, as I said to you, for example, as the result of an increase in the aggregate demand, and ends when input prices, cost of production, have increased. Hence, during the short run, producers are experiencing an increase in their real prices and produce more output, and the supply curve slopes upward. As you see here, the supply curve is enlarged and increased towards to the outward from the origin. Any increase in input prices, so-called the cost, which may follow, is assumed to lag behind increases in the general price level. In this analysis, short-run aggregate supply and long-run aggregate supply are separated as it is indicated on the table. This allows economists to be more flexible in their analysis of a modern economy. This can be seen in the following example. As you see, the price level is going from up and down or down to up. Then the short run aggregate supply is then start from 250, goes through 300, 350, 400. But when you look to the long run aggregate supply, unfortunately, it is becoming fixed and it is always 500 where it is at P5. Then this has meant that we are going to concentrate our economical activities between this period of time where the aggregate supply and aggregate, let's say, short run and long run is effectively accelerating and changing regarding to the price changes, because after this the short run price is becoming higher, but the long run is stay intact after this 500. Therefore, we suppose our economy is somehow realized around this range. The short run is also indicated here, and the long run, as you see, this is somehow where the price change is becoming ineffective for changing the aggregate supply until the long run intersect. And after the long run, then the price changes become ineffective for the full employment and the output becomes 500, where it is indicated here. After this, then we suppose our economical activities will not become any more effective and efficient for the economy, because as you see, the aggregate supply will not become effective results of this price changes, and therefore aggregate supply in the long run becomes a vertical position at 500 or 500,000 units for the output in the full employment. The most likely causes of a shift in the short-run aggregate supply curve is to accommodate changes in the short-run aggregate demand curve. And as it is indicated, and short-run shifts in response to change in the aggregate demand. And as you see, the price changes become effective for the aggregate supply until the long run, where the full employment is realized. And after this intersection, the price becomes increased, but the aggregate supply curve is not going to be effectively changed. As you see, the aggregate demand is shifted upper level, but then this will then shift the aggregate supply curve to the contractionary position, to the reduced position. And this will then create again the aggregate supply curve in the vertical line, where the equilibrium realized at the same level of this YF, where the long run is located or situated. Therefore, the price changes in the long run is not effective, because as much as you are shifting the aggregate demand and the price changes supposed to be affecting and changing the aggregate supply, it is then returned again to the aggregate supply in the long run and becomes to the equilibrium position, because aggregate demand is enlarged, but the aggregate supply is reduced at the level where the E2 is becoming the new equilibrium position, and the long run curve, where the aggregate aggregate supply long run curve is intersecting the aggregate demand in the both positions, become the same level for output as it is indicated YF, where the full employment is already realized and The economy is not anymore expanding, is not anymore enlarging, because in the full employment has meant you cannot use anybody else to produce something else. Therefore, it is supposed to be the long run is then realized at that level where the full employment is realized, where the full employment is achieved. The aggregate demand and aggregate supply, supply in the short run, to refresh you, building the short run aggregate demand, aggregate supply. Now we are going to include it. We are going to include the IS and LM, which is investment, saving, and liquidity and money. This will then help you to understand a little bit more comprehensively this structure in the aggregate demand and aggregate supply curves. The theory of the short-run fluctuations is supposed to be questioned, and the IS curve is generated from the Keynesian cross, and the LM, so-called liquidity money curve, is generated from the market for real money balances. The Keynesian cross and the money market is represented in the beginning phases, where the Keynesian cross is supposed to be investment saving, and the money market is the liquidity money curves. Then it is going to be intersect to each others in ISLM curves on the model. Then this will then direct to the aggregate demand curve, and then aggregate demand curve and aggregate supply curve will then intersect and realize the aggregate demand and aggregate supply model. And in the short run fluctuations is explanation. Now we will generate aggregate demand curve from investment saving and liquidity money, and use for short run and long run models of aggregate supply to explain the short run economic fluctuations, how it is realized. As it is indicated here, the fiscal policy which is used here, the governmental purchases, you know what is it? The governmental purchasing is very important, because the G is the in the Keynesian output expenditure model is the components of the GDP. Therefore, the governmental purchases shift the IS curve supposed to be to the right, as it is indicated here. The IS curve is shifted to the from green one shifts to the red one, and the LM curve is stay intact. And the LM curve here is M over P is the real money supply, is then liquidity, which is the function of the interest rate, and the output is indicated here on the slide. Then an increase in the government purchase shift the IS curve to the right, as it is indicated here, shifts right, moving away from the equilibrium, from the origin. And the IS curve shifts to be right, and the delta G, so-called the changes or differentiation of the governmental purchases, will be then 1 over 1 minus marginal propensity of consumption, which is going to be introduced to you next lecture, the marginal propensities and marginal propensity of saving and consumption, and marginal propensity to saving is supposed to be 1. And as much as you increase the marginal propensity to consumption, your saving rates will decrease, and vice versa is also correct. As much as you increase the saving rate, then the marginal propensity of consumption or consume is going to be reduced. Therefore, if you increase the saving rate, marginal propensity of saving, then the amount of the marginal propensity to consume is reduced. And as I said to you, vice versa is also possible. And here is supposed to be the interest rate is shifted up, and which this then at the end of the day causes some output and causes some capital and income is shifted also higher level from R1 to R2. The interest rate shifted higher and increased and enlarged, and the income is also enlarged from Y1 to Y2, whereas the LM is enlarged and increased. In the second graph and the second model, or so-called the slide, a decrease in the tax shifts the IS curve to the right is supposed to be, as it is indicated here. Then the IS curve, because now we are supposing the tax decreases, because this is governmental purchases is also, as you see, when you are increasing the governmental purchasing, this is contributing the output. The Y here is increased, because if you shift the governmental purchases, this will then cause enlargement. And in the second graph, you suppose the taxes, where you suppose decreasing the tax rate. This has meant you will have more money to consume. Therefore, this is also positively affecting the liquidity money on the blue line, and shifts again to the upper level, the IS curve, to the let's say IS2, where the real interest rate is supposed to be enlarged and the output is also enlarged. Therefore, IS curve shifts to the right, and the delta tax results of this differentiation of the tax decrease will then cause some positive impact to the economy, and marginal propensity of consumption is then going to be divided to 1 minus marginal propensity to consume, and this will then gives us the results of the output enlargement, because in any cases, as you see, the y1 is going to y2, and this will then cause more output to the economy, because reduction on the tax has meant you will reduce, as you see, y minus c. This is the consumption function, one part of the consumption function, and y minus t is the disposable income. And when you are going to reduce the tax rate, you will have more output, more income, isn't it? If you look this only y minus t, then the decrease in taxes will positively affect the output, isn't it? Therefore, then this will then multiply with c, then will increase the amount of the consumption in the economy. Therefore, the y, so-called the GDP, will positively affect it and shift it to the upper level, as it is indicated on the graph either. And fiscal policy and the IS curve, when the tax change is realized, note that government expenditures has a larger effect than does the same change in taxes. As I mentioned to you, taxes and government expenditures impact to the output positively, and at the end of the day, this will then shift the IS and LM curve to the upper position, especially the IS curve shifted to the higher position, and as you see, the LM is becoming also enlarged. And I mean, not enlarged, but it is then somehow shifted to the higher position. And fiscal policy and the IS curve, when the tax changes happened, note the government expenditure has the larger effects than those, not the same change in the taxes, as I mentioned to you. Here, then it is shifting the both parties to the upper level, where the expenditure model and the real money supply and the liquidity is, which is the, let's say, function of the interest rate and output, then shifting to the higher level. If the monetary policy is considered and the LM curve is questioned, then increase in the money supply shift the LM curve to the right, as it is indicated here. Now the money supply is supposed to be an increase realized in the money supply, which means the circulated money in the system will become enlarged. Therefore, the LM curve is supposed to be expanded to the right side, where it is going to LM1 to LM2 on the graphic. It is indicated here. And results of this will then cause a lower interest rate, where the interest rate is reduced from R1 to R2, because LM1 goes to LM2. The liquidity money moves from LM1 to LM2 to the red line, red curve, and this will then rise again the output and the income. As you see, the Y is going to be enlarged from Y1 to Y2. As you see, this is then positively affecting the economy. This has meant when the income, so when the money supply is increased, this will then positively responding to the output and the positively responding to this Keynesian model. Together, monetary and fiscal policies, when we are considering, as you see here, how the economy responds to a tax increase depends on the response of the money supply. As you see, if the tax increase, if the economy responds to a tax increase, depends on the response of the money supply, as it is indicated here. Money supply stays constant, but the interest rate and the output falls. Unfortunately, the money supply now is not changing, but the interest rate fall down and the output is reduced, because it is moving the IS curve from IS1 to IS2. If the money supply is held constant, the LM curve stays the same. This is not changed, but the tax increase affecting the economy and reduce it, isn't it? This is important because the money supply is now constant, but the IS curve, investment saving, on this, let's say, green line moving to the red line, which is reducing the interest rate and the output to the lower level. Okay. If to hold the interest rate constant, the money supply contracts. As you see now, if it is supposed to be the interest rate is intact, is not changing. As you see here, the interest rate here is same, is not changing. Then what will happen? The money supply is supposed to be contracted because LM1 goes to LM2. As you see here, it moves backward. It moves to the left side, and IS curve is also from the former slide is indicated is moving to the back side, moving towards to the origin. And the economy response to a tax increase depends on the response of the money supply. Because of the interest rate is constant, the money supply decreases and contracted, reduced. Only output is also reduced together. If to hold income constant, now we are holding the income constant to see what will happen. Then this will then, if the income is constant, what is happening? We are expecting that the interest rate, if your income is constant, you are not changing, not increasing, the economy response to a tax increase depends on the response of the money supply. The MX expanded, as it is indicated here. Money supply is expected to expand, enlarge, and the liquidity money is enlarged also because the interest rate is enlarged, because you are holding the income constant, and this will not causing some, let's say, reason to make saving because we are holding the constant income and there is no consolidated income given. Therefore, only the interest rate is supposed to be reduced in these cases, as it is indicated here. And when the interest rate is full and the income is constant, as you see, the liquidity money is reduced, sorry, is enlarged from LM1 to LM2, but IS investment saving is then going back to the origin. ISLM as a theory of aggregate demand, a higher price level price shift the LM curve upward, as it is indicated here. The higher prices shifted the LM curve upward position and lowering the income, unfortunately, because as you see, unless the IS curve is not affected in this case without any changing, then the output will then move from Y1 to Y2, then LM1 moves to LM2, and this is then indication that the higher prices causing some upward position for the LM. And this will then lowers the output from Y1 to Y2. We now allow price level to vary. Let's think that the prices is affected now. And the aggregate demand curve, as it is indicated on the graph, we have the aggregate demand curve in the below part on the, let's say, slide. The aggregate demand curve is then the relationship between the aggregate demand curve to price. As you see, is then the price level when it is going to be up is supposed to be shifted again the output to the lower level if you are letting the price to go up, as it is indicated in the first graph. Monetary expansion shifts the LM curve outward. If the monetary expansion is subjected, then this will then cause some expansion again to the liquidity money, to the LM, and this will then increase the output from Y1 to Y2. And suppose that the price becomes constant, and we can see the effects of monetary and fiscal policy on aggregate demand, where the IS and LM curve is affected on the graph, as you see on the upper part. And below, if this is as it is indicated, the prices stay intact and hold constant, then this will then shift the aggregate, so-called output from Y1 to Y2. Then aggregate demand curve moves from aggregate demand 1 to aggregate demand 2 to the higher position. This will then cause an increase on the aggregate demand curve at any given price level, where it is supposed to be hold constant. And here it is given again, a fiscal expansion shifts the IS curve outward, as it is observed here. This will then cause enlargement and increase, and this will then increase the income to the higher level. As you see, this will then, this fiscal expansion, any expansion, fiscal expansion means you either buying some bonds from the market and pump up the money to the system, and this is then fiscal expansion, or you may reduce the tax rate, and this will then cause some expansion to the economy. Money supply will then expand, and this is then result of this. Then IS is shifted and enlarged, and this will then increase the output positively from Y1 to Y2, and the aggregate demand curve, as it is indicated in where the P1 where the constant price is supposed, then cause some aggregate demand curve from 1 to 2 and shift this to the higher level at any given position where the P1 is constant. And now suppose IS, LM, and aggregate demand, aggregate supply, the short run and long run together illustrated and represented. Now let's add the short run and long run. As I said to you, we put now long run aggregate supply curve as a vertical line. We put the liquidity money, everything here, the short run, the vertical and the horizontal together. As you see in the below graph, the short run is becoming aggregate supply horizontal, in the long run is vertical. Then now we are supposing the short run and long run as it is indicated on the graph. The aggregate supply to our investment, saving, and liquid money and the aggregate demand model is represented on the upper part. As you see, sorry, in the lower part, assume the economy is operating below full employment. It's supposed to be the full employment is not realized. Therefore, it can be an enlargement on the output expected. As price falls, money demand decreases. Suppose the price falls and the demand decreases because of this. Then results of this, the LM curve shifts out. As it is in the upper part, the LM curves move upward position and enlarge to the right side. In the short run, price is fixed at P1 and equilibrium is at P1 again, because the price is supposed to be fixed now, and the equilibrium is at point 1 is supposed to be realized. As you see in the purple circle, there's a intersection, but in the long run, the price fall realize to P2 as it is indicated on the graph, where you are observing to shift the LM curve to the right side, and the equilibrium moves to point 2. This is characterized by shifting the short run aggregate supply to the lower level either, as observed here. This will then cause, because the aggregate demand curve is shifted, and results of this changing, since the price is not effective for changing the economy in the long run, but the aggregate demand curve is affected and moved to the two where intersect the aggregate demand and aggregate supply, 2, and where it is the equilibrium realized. And of course, the IS and LM is also lowered to the 2 on the upper part. Therefore, the long run equilibrium is achieved at 2, at point 2. The algebra of the IS-LM theory of the aggregate demand, the algebra behind the system is a bit tedious, but by solving the LM curve for R and plugging into the IS curve, which contains R on the right-hand side, you obtain the IS-LM equilibrium condition or aggregate demand curve. As it is given here, the y is equal to, as I mentioned to you, here we are having these propensities, and on the right side of the, let's say, equilibrium, we have the output on the upper part of the equation. Then A plus C is supposed to be the coefficients of the any given, let's say, parameters in this direction. It can be which is used for the marginal propensity, because below part 1 minus P is the marginal propensity to consume, which will affect and change the any parameter, let's say consumption, governmental expenditure, investment, or some tax changes will all included here. And it's supposed to be, the first one is the consumption, the second one is the, let's say, 1 over 1 minus marginal propensity of consume is the B, is multiplied with the governmental expenditures minus the tax, which is going to be subtracted from this equation. And also the other is also given for the R, for the investment, D minus 1 over B, which is given in this equation for the IS curve, for the estimation of the mathematical calculations. And on the in the mid, it is given the R, where the interest rate, so-called the real interest rate, is given for the output, which is subtracted from the real money supply. And then on the lower part, similarly, again, for the upper equation is given, where we are using now any other intercept and other, let's say, parameters for the IS curve, and for solving this output in this direction, where we are using again some algebra for calculating propensities for the each of the parameters, for the government, for the tax, for the let's say consumption and investment, which is not included here. The other parameters we can also add some other export import, but is not included, not considered in this model. But in our application, you will understand these things a little bit better, because these numbers, or these not numbers, these equations probably comes to you a little bit complicated. But when I'm going to introduce you step by step these propensities, marginal propensity consumption, marginal propensity saving, and applying to the expenditure output model, then you will understand, because these propensities will completely help us to calculate the differentiation of the any changes on the governmental expenditures, or for the tax, or for the net export, or the consumption, which is going to be considered in the model. This will be estimated easily by using these propensities for, and also multiplier also can be used in this model for calculating the output, for estimating the differentiation and the contribution to the whole economy. Because you can use only the expenditure output model, y plus y is equal to a c plus g plus I plus nx, all together to calculate these things. The additional changes also can be added to the government. For example, if government is 100 unit and it's going to be 150, then you can use also the upper equation without considering these propensities. But as I said to you, this doesn't mean you have to use always this output expenditure model for calculating these things. You can use simply the multiplier, or the let's say propensities, for being able to estimate the differentiation of the parameters, or any differentiation on the parameters, to see how it is reflecting and affecting the economy in simplest and faster, let's say, way. As a conclusion, for the short run, I can give you, in this section, we derived the aggregate demand curve via the ISLM equilibrium condition. We looked at fiscal and monetary policy effects on the ISLM models, and we look at the shifting effects that monetary and fiscal policies have on the aggregate demand curve, and use the ISLM model with the aggregate demand, aggregate supply model to explain short run and long run changes to the economy. And model background in the long run, then if we're going to introduce you shortly, this model uses the quantity equation as aggregate demand and assumes long run supply to be perfectly vertical and short run supply to be perfectly horizontal, as it is indicated. Short run supply to be perfectly horizontal and long run is vertical. As I said to you, aggregate demand curve is vertical when it is long run, and it is horizontal when it is short run. And price is supposed to be fixed in the short run, and in the long run, as much as you change the price, the aggregate supply is become fixed and is not changed. Therefore, we are trying always to intermediate model position for estimating our economies. If the model is out of equilibrium, it is the changing price level that returns the model to equilibrium. Now, building the aggregate demand long run, again, the quantity theory of money says MV is equal to PY, whereas on the right side of the equation, we are having the amount of the production is calculated in numerically, price and the output will be calculated. And on the left side, we are having calculating the amount of the money in the circulation. MV is the money is money supply or money in the circulation, and V is the velocity or speed of money which is circulating in the system. Therefore, M multiplied V is always equal to P multiplied Y. This is the Fisher equation for using these models. And rearranging, we get the MP, which is the real terms, and we add the K, where K multiply Y, where K is of course the some numbers which is going to be considered for the model, and is supposed to be 1 over V. So as P increase is supposed to be Y decreases, and if we map this out, we get an aggregate demand function. An increase in money supply or decrease in K implies that for any given P, Y is higher, hence an outward shift of the aggregate demand. Changing money supply is the monetary policy, also causes to the output expansion model some changes, and the demand side variables can shift the aggregate demand as well. And changing the G or T is the fiscal policy. As I mentioned, to governmental expenditure and tax policy is affecting changing fiscal policy, and the other parameters are the money policy. Similarly, decreasing the money or increasing the K will shift the aggregate demand to the different position. As it is indicated there, aggregate demand shifts either up or down depending to these changes. In the long run, output is determined by the factors where the Y is equal to FKL, or there is also A FKL because A is the technology and is not dependent on price. Hence, the long run aggregate supply is again vertical. As I said to you, price changes become ineffective, and in this context, a shift in aggregate demand curve causes a change in the price level but has no effect on the supply, on the output, so-called. Therefore, price changes become ineffective for the long run aggregate supply, but it is affecting and changing the aggregate demand. And in the short run, price is fixed. As I said to you, as you see, is a horizontal line in the classical. The aggregate supply curve is horizontal. In this context, a shift in aggregate demand causes a change in the in the output, but has no effect on the prices as it is indicated here. Then it is shifting the output from Y to the Y. As you see, the red aggregate output is an aggregate demand is shifted to the right side. And from short to long run, from economy begins in the long run equilibrium at point 1. As it is indicated here, if aggregate demand shifts output, the economy moves from point 1 to point 2 above full employment output, whereas the full employment is realized. As we approach the long run, there is upward pressure on price. As we indicated on the price increases, Y decreases, and we move along aggregate demand to point D. Point 3 is then, as it is indicated, shift the aggregate demand to the upper position, but the long run aggregate supply becomes again in the position where it is supposed to be fixed. And the end result is that Y returns to the natural level, but the P is permanently becomes higher because, as I said to you, when we are reaching to the full employment and full output, there is no more reason to enlarge the economy because you don't have any, let's say, factors for enlarging, especially the output, employment, is not available. Therefore, it is supposed to be, of course, we are never suppose that we are working with the full employment, but it's the scenario in the classical economical approach. Therefore, in the full economical approach, is supposed to be then the long run is fixed. And then you have to suppose this is then only shift as much as you are increasing the aggregate demand and the demand capacity is become enlarged. This will then only cause some shifts on the aggregate demand curve to move to the back to the left and increase the higher prices. And the stabilization policy, fluctuations in the economy can shift either aggregate demand or aggregate supply. fiscal and monetary policies are able to shift the aggregate demand, as I mentioned. Because of this, a shock to aggregate demand can be corrected with P and Y returning to the pre-shock levels. However, if there were a supply shock, then a policy adjustment would imply a trade-off between Y or P. As it is indicated here, it is shifting the short-run aggregate supply curve to the higher level because of this stabilization policy and because of this fixed long-run aggregate supply. And with a negative supply shock, accommodating the shock would mean returning the economy to Y, as it is indicated here, and causing a higher price in the long run. As I mentioned to you in the former slides, this will only cause to increase and enlarge the aggregate demand with the higher level and higher prices. Of course, not higher level, but higher prices level. And the short run is also supposed to be shifted because of this contraction. And the alternative would be to wait for the shock to pass. Then you can wait to see what will happen in the economy. It is better always to wait and see is the policy in the economy always to see whether the economy is correcting itself or some intervention is required. Usually, this is also dependent to the elasticities of the supply and demand curves. And in this direction, we have to determine regarding to this application and estimation. As a conclusion, I may finish for today's lesson. We construct a basis for the aggregate demand and aggregate supply model. And aggregate demand was derived from the quantity theory of money function, as it is mentioned for the Fisher. And the short run price is sticky, as mentioned in the former lectures. Short run aggregate supply is, of course, horizontal. And in the long run, factors inputs determine Y, and P is variable. So long run aggregate supply is supposed to be vertical. Okay, this was our lesson topic for you. You were the one for today, my lesson. If you do have any question, please do not hesitate to ask me. If not, then I will stop here.
Okay,
Do you have any questions?
Hocam, here at the short run goes horizontal, long run is vertical, finally, right?
Yes.
Okay.
You flashback video. I will try to upload at least this video to the YouTube because it takes time to upload these videos to the YouTube. I will upload this. This is the combination of these two. Then you will better understand, I think. You will flashback this, and later then I will upload the other videos. Then you will read all them and listen all them. Then you will understand better. If not, then come to my office and I will help you. As I said, in the short run, it is horizontal. In the long run, it is vertical. Don't forget this. This will then help you for estimation. Yes, please.
I will prepare the material and come to your office for discussion.
Okay.
Just to get something.
Okay. Tell the other colleague to watch this video because this is important. Because next lecture I will have some estimation, some calculation. So you have to be able to understand these things. Then you will then understand what I am doing. Okay.
Okay, hocam. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Tariq. I thank you also.
Thank
bye
you.
bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you. Bye bye.